how do current reports about civilian casualties at Gaza challenge international humanitarian law, challenge UN Charter, challenge Geneva Convention, challenge basic war law?
Good morning. Thank you very much. My name is John Dalton, as you indicate. Norman, good morning. Good morning, sir.
Thank you. Good morning.
As I said last week, Israel has no standards, no compunction against violating international law. They're a rogue agent these days. We have to distinguish, of course, between this administration in Israel and Israel as a country which is essentially founded on the basis of freedom for all. Right now, they're engaged in the most despicable acts of violence in Gaza City, destroying the infrastructure that would be needed for the Gazans to rehabilitate their land and to live in peace. And they're making it impossible for anybody who is living in the northern half of Gaza. They're forcing them all to move south towards Khan Yunis and to Rafah on the Egyptian border. And the constant disruption of life is really contrary to humanitarian law. It's contrary to the Geneva Conventions, even in terms of the protection of civilians. That's just embedded in the Geneva Convention and has always been a standard that has been utilized. And the number of people who have been slaughtered and the number of children who have been killed in Gaza is despicable. It cannot continue. But the only thing we get from the United Nations is Secretary General Guterres telling countries, don't be afraid of Israel. And it's a total disproportionate, it's asynchronous kind of a situation. Israel is not that big. But when you give a cockroach an atom bomb, you should be aware of the consequences. And this has to stop from the United Nations and others. They are trying to create facts on the ground which will prohibit a two-state solution.
What extent do you think diplomatic pressures, United Nations, EU or other states are able to influence military operations in Gaza or Ukraine? I have added both the war.
Yeah. Well, I think all diplomatic, over the last 20 years, all diplomatic initiatives to try to control Israel and Israel actions, whether it's in Gaza or Lebanon or other places, have been unsuccessful. They do not respect the opinion of others, and they believe that they have the right to make their own decisions, their own determination. They always play the victim. That we're surrounded and we're under attack, and yet they are the strongest militarily. They have the bomb. They're just simply play acting. This current administration in Israel is far right as far right can be, and so I don't see any possibility of a diplomatic solution even coming out of the United Nations. I think that the actions by 10 countries to try to recognize Palestine in a two-state solution is a Pyrrhic victory because Gaza is destroyed. There's nothing there to two-state about. It's a pile of rubble. And as you know, I lived in North Gaza. I lived in Gaza City, and I've traveled throughout Israel. And I think this whole idea is to create conditions on the ground which will prevent the implementation of a diplomatic solution that's a two-state solution. So they're very canny, they're very wily, they know exactly what they're doing. They're carrying out this destructive campaign to make it impossible for a viable two-state solution to survive. Now, the amount of the cost of repairing all the infrastructure in Gaza is in the hundreds of billions by now. So that's how I see the situation. I don't see it happening at all. I mean, now let's look at Ukraine and Russia and the failure of the baked Alaska by Trump to produce any kind of tasty results. Every time he says he ends the war, and here and there and so forth. But this failure of the United States and NATO to create a successful barrier to Russian expansion into Europe has tried to use diplomatic means, has tried all kinds of ways to do it. The United States is a player in both of them by providing and arming the attacker. I shouldn't say that. In Israel, that's the case. but it's China that's mobilizing weapons for Russia. But the language, you can't resort just to diplomacy. There must be economic war. There must be the inability to provide basic economic advantages to Israel on the world stage. I mean, they should be a pariah state as long as this administration is in power.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a lot of respect for Israel. I spent a lot of time there. But this current administration of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and Netanyahu are right-wing savages that are bent on destroying another civilization, Gaza, which may well have been the original inhabitants of that territory.
Sir, I want to do a question. I said earlier that what are the humanitarian challenges of displacement, food, shelter, medical aid arising from these conflicts, and how can the global community respond more effectively? We see United Nations is quite silent, sir.
Well, it's a big question. Let me outline some of the new contextual challenges, right? The amount of money which is now available to deal with humanitarian crises through the United Nations, through bilateral aid, is being cut dramatically. The United States is walking away from its international challenge temporarily. I believe they'll come back. The United Nations is going through a massive upheaval, even moving some of its population into key centers in Kenya. But money is scarce to deal with the magnitude of the humanitarian crisis. By the same token, I think we're running into some sort of a emotional fatigue. That how much of these pictures can we see day in and day out of children being held by their parents up in the air covered in ash as they've been bombed by Israel, or children lying in hospitals in Kiev, or other children and women in African countries like Sudan. We just simply can't wrap our mind around the inhumanity which is happening simultaneously in so many places, in a context where there's no money and where diplomatic efforts have fallen behind. We live in an instantaneous world. The time for diplomacy and the steady progress disappeared. We get instant news, instant, quick flashes back and forth. So there's no, as Norman calls it, there's no plan on a part of how do we deal with such a magnitude when we have feeling this emotional fatigue and observing moral collapse. How do you wrap your mind around that? And so it gets back to the question you asked before about what journalism and the media. They are not simply concentrating on that enough. The human dimension, the pain, the suffering. I've been in a number of post-conflict situations. It's not nice. It's not the feeling, you just simply feel exhausted all the time. So I hope that somehow out of this, the philanthropy will come forward, private contributions will come forward, that recognize the enormous change in the global psyche about humanitarian challenges.
There is a breaking news and which will make happy the cricket lovers of Bangladesh. I just want to share between the topics. Bangladesh beat Sri Lanka in Asia Cup Super 4 opener. News is Bangladesh won a last over thriller against Sri Lanka by 4 wickets in Dubai, opening their Super 4 campaign strongly. Congratulations, Bangladesh cricket team.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Norman. Let me do a question to Dalton. Dalton, you know, what kinds of vulnerabilities make airports and other critical infrastructure targets for cyber attack? Because we have a news, some large airports in Europe are facing disruptions owing to a cyber attack. This raises issues of infrastructure security, resilience and international coordination. It's a huge matter going on in Europe.
It's a huge matter going on in the United States too. We can look at disruption at airports, but cybersecurity also affects election integrity. We've been through that in the United States where cyber attacks or purported cyber attacks have affected election results. We have the situation where the electric grid and the water systems are all now driven by technology. So they're exposed to cyber in a way that they never were before. And in fact, we have significant threats where I was from in the Northeast of shutting down the whole Northeast electric grid through a cyber attack. Luckily, that was able to be fixed. But this is a function of anarchists on one hand, political opportunists like Russian operatives that were involved in the 2016-2020 elections. And it's also a function of war by another means. This is an act of war. I mean, you can talk about how they're disrupting the economy, disrupting the airline flow, disrupting commerce and business. It's war by another name. And it's so difficult to isolate it because of the concept of network. Everything is interconnected in the system. So even finding the source of the cybersecurity attack, even finding the individuals, which are non-state actors, paid for and organized by a state like Russia, for example, in the 2016 election, this is a huge problem of the integration of technology and the systems approach that we have to making everything automated and fully integrated. So this is a huge problem. It's being addressed. I think that there are people that are working very, very hard on the United Nations. All the numerous countries are trying to work on to prevent this. There's also ransomware that's a function that comes into this. Stealing intellectual property by lack of cybersecurity. It's a multi-dimensional problem that's being addressed, but because anybody becomes able to plug into a network and access critical infrastructure, this is going to be something we're facing for a very, very long time.
It is more dangerous than war, sometimes in some aspects.
Well, I mean, if you look at, it'll cause more of an economic impact if, for example, somebody is able to hack into information that enables another country to make an atomic bomb. You know, we had I think that was his name, Khan.
Microchips.
No, the guy, the Khan, the Pakistani who provide information to North Korea. That what's happening is just simply the failure of us to appreciate the dynamic changes which are taking place through technology. I mean, AI is a good example, but on another side of it, we are just now at the network stage when everything is accessible, everything is in a system. Finding how to penetrate that system with an evil intent can cause enormous economic disruption.
All right.
Whether it's airplanes or what.